Hello again, this is Beth Dixon, and today we're going to look at fractions, decimals, and percents and how to convert back and forth. And we have a chart of some of the common fractions, decimals, and percents, ones that you really should be able to know and be able to convert back and forth. And we're going to look on how to convert them. Some of the problems will have fractions and we'll convert those to decimals and percents. Some of them will be decimals and we'll convert those to fractions and percents. And some of them will be percents and we'll convert those to decimals and fractions. In this case, I'm really particular about the order in which I do these problems. I always do them in the order that they're listed here. I go from a fraction to a decimal, from a decimal to a percent, or I go from a percent to a decimal and a decimal to a fraction. And I know there are ways to go from a fraction to a percent and a percent to a fraction, but I find it easier to move through the decimal to get to these answers. It just makes my life a little easier as I'm doing these problems. And so let's just dive into some problems and explain as I go through the problems the procedures I use. The first one I have is the fraction, and the fraction is 1/10. So I want to convert that to a decimal. And the way that I do that is that I convert it by division. Remember, a fraction is really just saying 1 divided by 10. That's another way of looking at the fraction. And the way I do it is the 10 is going to be on the bottom, and then I'm going to divide it. It's like flipping this over, and the 1 comes inside here. 10 does not go into 1, so I need to add a decimal place. It'll come straight up, and then 10 goes into 10 one time. So as a decimal, that's going to be 1/10 or 0.1. Then to convert this to a percent, percent means per or for every, and then cent means 100. So for every 100. So we need to move 100 or 100th place. So we need to move it 2 places, tens and hundreds. That's why this is always 2 places. So that's going to be 1, 2 places, and the new decimal place will be here. So that's going to be 10%. Okay, let's look at the next problem. We have decimal 0.125, and I want to change it to the percent first. So I'm going to move my decimal 0.125. I'm going to move it 2 places. The decimal ends up between the 2 and the 5, and I add my percent sign. And what we're saying is 12.5% is equivalent to 0.125. Okay, now let's look at how to change this decimal into a fraction. So to change it into a fraction, I want to remember my place values. The first one is a tenth. The second one is 100th. The third one is 1,000th. So that means it's going to be over 1,000. I can also remember that the number of zeros here matches the number of places after the decimal. 10th, 100th, 1,000th, 0, 0, 0. 3 places after the decimal, 3 zeros. Then I write 1/25. Now, this is in fraction form, but we always want to reduce our fractions, and so I'm going to reduce it. Now, we can take a really shortcut, but I'm not going to do that. But I am going to reduce it by dividing by a number that will go into both 125 and 1,000. And I can kind of see that 25 would be a good number. And I could come over here and divide 25 into 125 and do that by hand. And I can figure out 5 5s are 25, carry my 2. 5 times 2 is 10 plus 2 is 12, and I can figure that out. But we can also just use the calculator. 125 divided by 25, and we get 5. And then 1,000 divided by 25 gives me 40. And then what goes into both 5 and 40 would be 5. 5 goes into itself 1 time. 5 goes into 40 8 times, so that reduces down to 1/8. And if you have your calculator out, you can also type in .125 math and then fraction, choosing the fraction button. It was already highlighted, so I press enter and then enter, and it'll give you the 1/8. Or you could have typed in 125 divided by 1,000 and then choose the math key. It's already highlighted on the fraction, so it'll convert that and it'll reduce that down to 1/8. Now, how much you use the calculator is dependent on your teacher. My recommendation is to use it about as much as I am going to in these problems. Okay, next we have 1/6. Okay, we're going to take the 6 and divide it into the 1. 6 goes into 10 1 time. 6 goes into 6 times with 4 left over. 6 goes into 40 6 times, which gives me 36, which gives me 6 left over, which gives me 4 left over again. And 6 goes into 46 6 times, which is 36, with 4 left over again. And notice I'm eating up my paper and being very messy there, but it's going to give me 0.16, and the 6's are going to keep repeating. To indicate that, I'm going to draw a bar over that, or if it told me to round, like it said to round to 3 decimal places, it would be 1.6, and since the next decimal after that's going to be a 6, that tells me to round the 3rd decimal place up to a 7. Depends on what the directions tell you to do, so you have to read your directions carefully. And then to change it to a percent, 1.6666, and I'm just going to go ... and then I'm going to move it 2 decimal places, so that's going to give me 16.6, and the 6's repeat percent, so I'm just going to put a line over it to show that the 6's keep repeating, and that's a repeating decimal. Now, to help keep our things straight here, I'm going to kind of switch colors, and this time we have a percent, and it's 20%. So instead of moving in this direction as we go from fraction to decimal to percent, notice that we move the decimal to the right. When we're going from percent to decimal, notice we're going to be moving the decimal to the left. So when we come back here, we're going to take 20 and move the decimal back 2 places. So that ends up to being 0.20. And to write that as a fraction, that's going to be 0.20 is going to be 20, excuse me, not 0.20, but just 20 over 20 is the tenths, the 2 is the tenths, the 0 is the hundredths. So we have 20 over 100, divide both by 10, then both by 2. The next one we have is 1/4. So I'll divide 4 into 1. Goes 2 times. And then 5 times. I'm squeezing that in there, but that's going to give me a decimal of 0.25. Then to make it into a percent, we take 0.25, move over 2 places, and that's going to be 25%. The next one we have 0.30. So we're going to take 0.30. Again, we're moving from a decimal to a percent. So I'm going to move it 2 places to the right, and that gives me 30%. To write it as a fraction, that's 0.30. So that would be 30 over 100, because that's tenths, 100ths. Divide to reduce, that's going to be 3 over 10. Divide both of them by 10. Now, one thing I notice about the next problem, and I usually star this problem, and for when I taught the class, I just told students this is one to memorize. We can do this problem, but this is one that's just so common that you really should just memorize what the answer is. We're going to divide 3 into the 1. And that's going to go 3 times. 3 times 3 is 10, and then we're going to get 1 again. And then we're going to bring down the next 0, and 3 goes into 10 3 times, 9 with 1. And we can already see that that's going to be repeating 3's. And again, we'll use the little bar there to show that. So this is just 0.3 repeating. And to write it as a decimal, to change the decimal into a fraction, we move that decimal 2 places, and we get 33.3 repeating. And if I left it here, notice there's a remainder of 1, so I could move the decimal 2 places and put the decimal here, and then I have a remainder of 33 with 1 out of the 3 remaining, so it's the same as saying 33 with 1/3 left over. And notice you get 1/3 and 33 and 1/3%. So it's kind of got that pattern there that works out as we do our division. So 1/3 is either 33.3 repeating percent or 33 and 1/3%. And again, it's a really common one, and it's something nice to look at and to practice on. Now, to keep these videos from being too long, I've kind of reached a mark in length that I'm going to cut it off, and then you can do, and we'll pick up where we left off on the next one. Thank you.